Okay, picture this. It's December 1900. You're on a tiny, windswept rock in the middle of the North Atlantic called Island Moor. There's a brand new lighthouse here, a beacon of safety, manned by 3 seasoned keepers. But something happened on this island, something that would turn into one of the greatest maritime mysteries of all time. A disappearance so total, so completely baffling, it has been fueling speculation for well over a century. So let's get into it.
A dreadful accident has happened. I mean, those are the words that kick this whole thing off. This is from an urgent telegram sent by Captain Harvey of the lighthouse supply ship, the Hesperus. Can you just imagine receiving a message like this? It's so stark, stripped of any detail, just a blunt announcement of a tragedy. And at that moment, he couldn't have possibly known the full, bizarre story. This right here is the official start of the Flannan Isles mystery. All right, so let's really set the scene. It's the day after Christmas, December 26th, 1900. The supply ship Hesperus is slicing through the cold, gray waters of the North Atlantic. On board is a relief keeper named Joseph Moore. He's all set to start his shift, let one of the guys head home for a well-earned break. But as they get closer to the island, this really deep sense of unease starts to creep over the whole crew. Something just feels off.
As the Hesperus got closer, the warning signs just kept piling up. First, there was no flag flying from the staff to welcome them. That was standard procedure. Then, the supply box at the landing, which should have been full of things the keepers needed, was empty. Captain Harvey blasted the ship's powerful steam whistle, and the sound just echoed off the cliffs with no answer. He even fired a signal rocket, a flare shooting up into that bleak sky. And the response? Absolutely nothing. Just this profound, unnerving silence. So Joseph Moore gets into a small boat, gets rowed ashore, and starts that long climb up the 150-foot cliffs. And I bet with every single step up those stone stairs, that feeling of dread just got heavier and heavier. What Moore found inside wasn't a scene of some violent struggle or chaos. It was something almost worse, a scene of chilling, unnatural order. The main gate was closed, the doors to the living quarters also shut tight. Inside, the kitchen was totally clean, but the fireplace was cold. The fire had been out for days. The beds were all empty and neatly made. But maybe the most unsettling detail of all, every single clock on the island had stopped. The lighthouse wasn't just empty. It felt like time itself had just frozen in place.
So, with the keepers, James Ducant, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur just gone, vanished without a single trace, the story absolutely exploded. And you know what happens when there's a vacuum of hard facts? Speculation and folklore just rush right in to fill the void. This is really the point where the story of the Flannan Isles leaves the world of a simple maritime accident and just blasts off into the realm of legend. At the very heart of the Flannan Isles myth is the station's logbook. The tabloids and storytellers claimed it held these frantic, terrifying entries that chronicled the keeper's final days. And these entries, well, they didn't describe a normal storm. No, they painted a picture of some kind of creeping, supernatural dread that was driving these tough, experienced seamen completely out of their minds. Just listen to these supposed entries. They talk about one keeper being irritable. Another one, the tough old sailor Donald MacArthur, is supposedly crying. I mean, can you imagine? Then the men are praying together. And that final entry, it's so hauntingly peaceful. Sea calm, God is over all. It almost suggests the terror was over, which makes their disappearance even more strange. This logbook became the absolute cornerstone for theories about ghosts, sea monsters, you name it. But there is a huge problem with this story. Yeah, this slide really just lays it all out, the huge gap between the legend and what the investigators actually found. Those terrifying logbook entries? Turns out they were a complete fabrication, probably invented years later. The official report says the last entries were just routine weather notes written on a chalk slate. That dramatic half-eaten meal on the table? Nope. Superintendent Muirhead specifically reported the kitchen was clean and tidy. And the overturned chair, a staple of any good ghost story, never mentioned in a single primary account. The bottom line is, all those sensational, spooky details that make the story so famous, they just aren't true. Okay, so with that supernatural logbook pretty much debunked, some people started looking to the island's own history for answers. You see, Alien Moor, which means the Big Island, it had a reputation. For centuries, people from the nearby Isle of Lewis treated it as this sacred, almost otherworldly place. It was a place with really bizarre traditions and stories of supernatural inhabitants. Little men. One of the most persistent myths was about a secret language that people used on the island so they wouldn't anger the spirits. It sounds pretty mystical, right? But the truth, which was actually recorded way back in the 1690s, was, well, a lot less exciting. It was just a local folk tradition of using synonyms for common Gaelic words as a sign of respect. So instead of visk for water, you'd say burn. Instead of crag for rock, you'd say cruy. They weren't casting magical spells, it was just a different way of speaking. So, no, it had nothing to do with phantoms. Okay, so let's get back to the official investigation. With all the myths and ghost stories stripped away, what we're left with are the cold, hard facts. And these were gathered by a man named Superintendent Robert Muirhead from the Northern Lighthouse Board. This was a guy who knew the keepers personally, and he was absolutely determined to find a rational explanation for what happened. So Muirhead's investigation quickly established a pretty clear timeline. The last confirmed contact with the keepers was December 7th. The last sign of any normal life on the island was that 9 a.m. entry on the log slate made on Saturday, December 15th. Now, here's the crucial part. That very same night, a passing steamer called the Arctur specifically noted that the lighthouse was dark. This is huge because it pinpoints the time of the disappearance to the afternoon of December 15th. Now, this is where the real evidence comes in. Muirhead found incredible damage, but it was all concentrated on the west landing, the side facing the wide open Atlantic. Get this, a heavy box of ropes wedged into a crack in the rock 70 feet up was just gone. A massive block of stone weighing over a ton had been moved. But the most staggering piece of evidence, the one that tells the whole story, was a life buoy. It was secured to railings 110 feet above sea level, and it had been ripped away, its ropes and canvas shredded to pieces. This physical evidence led Muirhead to one single, inescapable conclusion. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't madness, it was a wave of such unimaginable size and power that it had surged all the way up the cliffs and just scoured everything clean from its path. This became the official explanation, the giant wave theory. But this is the question that's kept the mystery alive for so long, right? It just sounds impossible, doesn't it? We think of waves breaking on a beach. How on earth could a wall of water reach a height of over 100 feet and still have enough force to not just splash things, but to destroy iron railings and literally rip a lifebuoy from its mountings? I mean, just think about that number for a second. 110 feet. That's the height of an 11-story building. Muirhead was completely convinced. He wrote in his report that the force of the sea had torn that lifebuoy away. This wasn't just some spray. This was a solid, destructive wall of water crashing down on a platform that was supposed to be perfectly safe. And hey, if you still have any doubts, you have to listen to this. More than 50 years later, another keeper named Walter Aldebert was stationed on that very same rock, Eileen Moor. He was haunted by the story, so he made it his mission to document the true power of the sea out there. And he personally witnessed and photographed waves breaking over the island. He said that in a bad storm, even the lamp itself, nearly 300 feet up, could get hit with spray. He was once almost washed away himself from a spot 200 feet above the sea. The giant wave wasn't just a theory. For him, it was a terrifying documented reality of life on that island. So, if we accept the reality of these absolute monster waves, we can actually start to piece together what most likely happened in those final, desperate moments on the afternoon of December 15th, 1900. See, this wasn't one single event that just took all three men at once. And we know this because of a key clue that was found right at the very beginning. Donald MacArthur's heavy winter coat was still hanging on its peg inside the lighthouse. The waterproof oilskins of the other two men, however, they were gone. So this slide lays out the most plausible reconstruction, and it was actually proposed years later by that other keeper, Walter Aldebert. It probably started after a recent storm had passed. Two of the keepers, Ducat and Marshall, put on their oilskins and go down to the west landing to secure some equipment. Then, out of nowhere, an enormous rogue wave just slams the landing, and one of the men is swept away. The survivor scrambles back up, screaming for MacArthur, who's inside. Hearing the alarm, MacArthur just runs straight out the door, not even thinking to grab his coat. And as he and the other keeper rush to the cliff edge, probably trying to spot their friend or throw a line, a second colossal wave strikes, and they too are washed into the churning Atlantic. And you know what? This scenario, it fits every single piece of evidence.
It explains why 2 sets of oilskins were missing, but MacArthur's coat was left behind. It explains the specific damage at the West Landing, and it explains how 3 experienced men could be taken from a place that should have been totally safe. The solution isn't supernatural, it's just a tragic testament to the brutal, indifferent power of the ocean.
And yet, the story just persists as a great mystery. That fabricated logbook is still quoted way more often than the official superintendent's report. So I guess the final question is this. Why are we so drawn to the idea of a spooky, ghostly tale, even when a far more terrifying and plausible truth is staring us right in the face? Maybe, just maybe, the idea of a monster is less frightening than the reality of a wave that can reach up and just pluck you from a cliff, 100 feet above the sea.